When I think of the main difference between the seasons, like fashion, right? What you decide to wear.
Told it's not a good idea to wear very colorful clothing during the season when bees are running around because that attracts them.
Autumn starts with A. Oh, you guys are American.
Thank you.
Welcome back to another edition of Clusterprof with Rory and Ryan. And we are once again joined by our special, though becoming less special guest, Carlin.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic is on something that we all experience every year. 4 times to be exact. Although maybe that's a simplistic way of putting it. This is the seasons. Anyone would like to start off with a starting point, or shall I initiate it?
Well, it sounds like you've got something you can spark the fire with.
Let's do it.
Well, so what are the seasons? Well, from a scientific perspective, they are...
Can I answer?
Go.
Spring.
Yes.
Summer.
Yes.
Autumn.
Yes.
Winter.
Yeah!
Could you expand a bit on that point?
Yeah, which...
Spring is the first one for some reason, even though it's a cycle, so I don't know why one should get to be the number one.
Because it starts with an S
Ah,
and a P.
That's it.
but autumn starts with A. Oh, you guys are American,
Thank you.
so you don't.
So it falls to the bottom in our world.
Ooh.
False.
Well, you know what autumn means, right?
There's a
Autumn.
Vernal equinox.
Autumn is the third season. Comes between summer and winter.
Ah.
It's the brown one.
Some people have their names named after seasons. This is a really interesting thing.
Do you know anyone named Spring?
Except that one.
Spring.
Sounds like a kangaroo's name.
It's a surname.
Is it?
Like Dick Spring. Dick Spring. That's. Do you have to bleep that?
I think.
Here's the thought. Seasons. Humans respond to the seasons, right?
Yes.
Well, humans follow the seasons, like the natural seasons, and they make like human seasons, or like there's a human calendar, and this stuff happens in the various seasons. So this podcast is being recorded in 2020, and this was the year of coronavirus, COVID-19 outbreak. Well, it's called 19, so maybe the outbreak was in 2019. But it took up a lot of 2020. And of course the natural seasons still happened, right? We had winter and spring, and now it's the summertime. But I had this feeling this year that the human seasons aren't really happening, at least as lively as they normally do. I'm living in China. Normally during the summer there are certain things I would do. Go back to Ireland, take part in some summer events. But this year that doesn't happen. So it's kind of made me aware of this, like, the human seasons as well as the natural seasons. Like, I feel like I'm still in the same season as I was in winter, almost, in a kind of human way. Maybe that's pushing it a bit. Do you know what I mean?
I get what you're saying. Sounds like you mean you feel like you're in a state of limbo almost.
Yeah, it's a bit, yeah.
I've heard this sentiment from others as well, that it feels like people are forgetting that it's not still February.
Yeah.
Pretty regularly, I would say.
Okay, So, why in so many cultures is there 4 seasons?
Well, there's the 2 big boys.
Summer and winter. You experience extreme cold and extreme heat.
Yeah, 2 extremes of weather. And then you have the changers.
We should really agree about whether to call this season fall or autumn.
I was thinking, could we like make it like fall them or something?
Fall
Fall them.
Or fold them.
all.
All? That would be confusing though.
It'd be really confusing.
Yeah.
We do have the idea of the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the vernal equinox, and the autumnal equinox that have something to do with the Earth's relationship to the sun at the time of the year, and that's supposed to technically mark the beginning of the seasons.
One really cool thing about seasons is that one of their key features is that they're a fact, right? That seasons happen regardless of what you want or what you need.
Yes, but in the human mind, there seems to be certain ideas as to what. Okay, in certain cultures, there's certain ideas as to what occurs in each season. Like snow is typically associated with winter, but I mean, anyone who has lived in a cold place might have ran into a person from a tropical country, and coming to their place was the first time they'd ever seen snow. And I don't think Siberia experiences anything during the summer that the people in many other cultures would associate that extreme heat.
Yeah, but regardless of where you're living or what the culture is, seasons still come, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of like what you would need or want, and so they're going to come regardless of what we need or what we want, and I think it represents well this continual change, which is something that's brought up a lot in Taoism and in Buddhism as well, right? About this idea of constant change regardless of the desires of people.
There's no stopping them. And we humans have to respond to them. So it's a bit like life and death. Right? We talked about death in our death podcast.
Come to think of it, 2 of the seasons in and of themselves almost represent life and death, because spring is when the crops start coming out, the flora starts blooming out, the fauna that was in hibernation comes back, and then fall is when a lot of those plants and whatnot start to enter into, I guess, a state of dormant, or if not, or just die out altogether.
The plants or the animals?
Well, animals also have some problems during the winter, but they usually end up having to leave or go into hibernation or something.
Yeah, so like say leaves on a tree, right? Leaves get their birth in the spring and they're full of life during the summer. They begin to wilt in the autumn and then they're dead when the winter comes.
We're talking about plant death happening in the winter.
And then new leaves are born. Carlin, you were talking about like seasons happen whether or not we want them to. Like they would definitely just happen. And it kind of reminded me of working. If you have like an office job that kind of goes Monday to Friday, the week will come and go, and you might be like anxious that you're not going to get all your work done. But if you're fortunate enough to have a job that when the weekend comes, you can stop worrying about it at least for 2 days. it's like these two different time patterns. One is oriented by the work that needs to get done, right? So that's one kind of time pattern, and that's your work for this week. But then there might be another time pattern that it's just like the number of hours left in the week, or the number of working hours left in the week. 30 hours left in the working week. That's determined by just like the pattern, the cycle of the weeks. But then there might be 100 hours left of work to be done. That's determined by like the cycle of like, the work to be done. With human activity, we have our own time periods, time frames, and sometimes maybe our human lives are not going very smoothly. But then we have this other cycle that's there, which is the seasons. So no matter how things are going in our personal lives, the summer will come about anyway, or the winter will come about anyway. You know, including those like festivals, which are also kind of like human things, where they're part of this calendar, and the calendar which is determined by, I guess, the passing of time, the rise and fall of the sun, and the seasons.
There's like a comfort and stability in that, right?
Stability, yeah.
But how has technology changed our view of the seasons? I mean, if we had lived 150 years ago in Canada, the winter would be an absolutely horrifying time to be living. Nowadays, Canada's not a heavily populated area by any means, but people got cars and heating and all sorts of stuff that makes a harsh winter more survivable.
And to hop onto that regarding technology and the seasons, I think that something we take for granted a lot today is food security, which is sort of determined by the seasons, but with modern agriculture technology is less of a problem.
Yeah, we see like seasonal vegetables, but we don't have a feeling of like scarcity in the winter. The further we get away from things like agricultural life, and the more we get into, say, like technology, kind of the further we get away from the seasons, the more our lives unfold in our phones, in our computers. 100 days is just 100 days. The phones or computers don't really care if it's summer that day, or if it's hot that day, or if it's cold, or whatever. They're just like measures of days, right?
Yeah.
Here's a question for you guys. So we talked about the spring and autumn as being intermediaries between two extremes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the fact that the era that Confucianism was born into, that Confucius was born in, is known as Chunqiu, spring and autumn period, and then the period that precedes it is Jianguo, the warring state period, in which basically during the spring and autumn period, things just society just kind of starts to have its social fabric fall apart, and war starts breaking out amongst various states. And then when the warring state era comes, things just go completely all-out war.
Well, I did a small bit of research into this. I relied on Wikipedia. Have you heard of it?
What is it?
Wikipedia?
No, I don't know. I don't have a VPN.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know about this, but go on.
Wikipedia is a website full of information.
What kind of information?
Information on like things, like for example, baseball caps are on there.
So it's like a website about baseball caps?
No, it's about like a lot of different things. So like photographs are also on there.
So it's about photographs.
No, like lots of different things. So like the like American history is also on there.
Can you make a list of like 10 things that would be on this website, and then maybe we can find the similarities between these things, and then we can determine kind of what the website is actually.
This is going to get pretty meta here. There are lists on this website of what is on the website. So the website contains lists of things that can be found on the website.
Sounds like the computer technicians of this website have a lot of time on their hands. Or they've been reading lots of sci-fi.
I think I'm getting it.
And it's written by many people.
The author is many
Oh,
people.
okay, so it's not just a few
It's not just one
tech
guy.
nerds.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Did you learn anything from your Wikipedia research?
This time period is called spring and autumn because, okay, so it was actually named after a book. Okay, so the Truncio period was named after the Truncio book, which is like a historical record. And the reason that was called Truncio, the reason the historical record was called Truncio, was that it recorded like the activities of the palace, and the activities of the palace tended to happen in the spring and autumn seasons. And why that is the case, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Hey, I just looked up this Wikipedia thing. It's
Yeah.
pretty nifty.
It's nice.
It's pretty good. It reminds me of a poem that was written by, he's a Lebanese poet-philosopher from the early 20th century named Khalil Gibran.
Oh, yeah.
You know this guy?
Prophet.
Yeah, the Prophet. He's very famous for that. But he had another book, which I recommend reading, just a little shorter. It's called Tears and Laughter. And the poem I'm thinking of was about the seasons, sort of, but it was a love poem. And he goes through each season and talks about a love that he has. And the behavior and the description of their relationship reflects the season. So the poem starts with spring, and it talks about how heated and how it's like a new thing, and how the relationship is forming and all of this. And it moves on from spring to summer, where it's sort of lazy and just comfortable, kind of like they're in the relationship, you know. And then it moves on to autumn, and at this point they're aging, and the nature of the relationship is sort of changing. And then of course moving to winter, where they both are old, and then of course eventually die at the end. But it's really interesting, and I think it's like in the context of Gibran, it's like maybe the relationship between a man and a woman, but a lot of his poetry is also religious. So like I sometimes will read it as like a relationship between a man and God as well.
That was kind of illustrates what we were talking earlier about this kind of analogy between life and death and the seasons. And yeah, this talked about a relationship. It's hard to just talk about life. It's easier to talk about life if you're talking about something in particular. And it could be like a relationship.
I wanted to read it aloud, but it's kind of long, so I'm not going to.
You didn't read the poem.
Oh.
It's much too long for that, so I'm not going to.
Ah, I see.
Read it aloud, but it's much too long for that, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
How about Nietzsche's habit of living in a different place each season? He personally said this had to do with so his thought wouldn't be stuck in a dead end, or which, I mean, I think there's been countless people who change the position of or ways they do stuff to get their creativity or their thinking or whatever going.
Well, that's interesting because seasons are already a change that does that, right? Then Nietzsche's moving as well, so it's like double change.
Yeah.
It just so happens Nietzsche's thing is thinking. But you could have the same logic for like maybe like a sports person or a musician or an actor. You know, like people need some variety in their life, or else they get into a kind of a rut. You know.
I get what you're saying.
And Nietzsche himself, he was exposed to the seasons. So he was a thinker who liked to walk and write. When he was doing his philosophy, he liked to be walking. So he really must have experienced like, different seasons in different places more viscerally than we would today, typically, right? Protected from the seasons.
But to really experience the seasons, this is why I kind of find this a little bit odd, because to really experience the seasons, I think like maybe easier done if you stay in the same place, right? But I can see the trees here in the spring, the summer, the autumn, and the winter. But if, like, say, you know, if in the summer I go to Liaoning, or like in the northeast of China somewhere, where it's like maybe a bit cooler and by the sea, and then in the winter I go to Hainan, then I'm making the seasons less extreme. So maybe experience the seasons less. Do you know what I mean?
I got what you mean, but even staying in a place doesn't necessarily guarantee it, because well, I know of at least one person who's from Costa Rica, and they made a comment about how it's mild there all year round. So maybe the Costa Ricans, if this fact is true, maybe they still feel something different about the seasons. It's just not maybe that stress or pain that people in many other places feel.
Yeah.
And in the example of Nietzsche, he would have been going to, I think, relatively familiar places within Central Europe. So maybe it wouldn't have been pronounced as maybe if he was going to the northeast of China or to Hainan or to I don't know. I don't know what his goal was. If it was to avoid certain seasons, I know his health was not good.
He might have also been somewhat influenced by Schopenhauer, who was very adamant in one essay about how there's a lot of different things that will wreck your train of thought, and therefore you need to find them and get them out of your life.
Is there anything Taoist to be said about the seasons?
There's that one part in the first chapter of the Zhuangzi where it talks about, there's this, I think it's a fly, and it doesn't know the difference between the sunrise and the sunset. And then there's this bee or something that doesn't know the spring from the fall. I mean, spring from the autumn. But then there's this plant that its spring is 800 years and its autumn was 800. And then there's this tree that recently died that, while it was alive, its spring was 8,000 years and its autumn was 8,000 years. I mean, this is clearly a comment on the relativeness of things, which the Zhuangzi really likes to hit on. But
isn't there some phrase possibly from the Zhuangzi? It's from the Qiushui chapter, Autumn Water chapter, but it's not actually from this chapter. It's from a commentary on this chapter. You can't talk to a summer insect about ice. Yeah, it's about relativity in a sense, or like subjectivity, like what different people know about the world. I think there's also something in that chapter about a frog in the bottom of a well, and you can't talk to a frog who lives in a well about the sea, because they won't know what they're talking about.
This is repeated throughout the Zhuangzi, like Peng, the little cicadas and the little birds. They can't understand what it's like to go up a height of like 10,000 li. They don't have the wing capability. But they even mock him because they apparently have enough. Their little wings do enough for them to where they get fed and whatnot.
And when I'm talking to my cat, who is only one season old, I always have to be mindful that if I start talking about the autumn and winter, she's not going to know what I'm talking about.
She's really smart though.
She is
She
smart,
might.
but I think even that would be.
Wait,
Yep.
you forgot something.
I forgot something.
yeah.
How could I forget? Do we have a 1 minute segment?
Why, yes, we do today. I bought some mangoes. Mangoes, I don't know why I bought so many mangoes because they're messy and I don't actually have a proper peeler for them, so I had to use my hands and they got all sticky but mangoes, I don't know if they're amazing or not. I've never eaten one from India where I think they're native to, but avoid the stickiness. Get a proper peeler and cut them up properly and all that stuff.
Sage advice. I'd just like to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I'd like to thank our guest, Carlin, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I'd like to, on behalf of the Clusterprof team, welcome any comments or questions, maybe any suggestions for topics that you'd like to hear about. Maybe even if you want to be on the show, shoot us a message.
And also, our last video had quite a nice feedback and viewership and all that. Thanks for all that, guys. It makes it quite worthwhile.
I actually have one thing to say as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I was surprised that Ryan pretty much said all of my opinions.
Okay.
I know I already said that I shared all of Ryan's opinions, but that wasn't entirely true.